Hello, this is James Studinger. I want to share our perspectives, a bit of a reflection from 2025 and also forward looking into some expectations for 2026 with you. I want to step back a few years and take a look at the market of 2022, which was a horrible year. It compares to the drop of the market in COVID, the financial crisis of 2008, and even all the way back to Y2K, which was the tech bubble. So we had an extreme drop in the market in 2022. And at that time, I had projected that some pre-retirees might hit new net worth milestones in 2024. And then some retirees could start to hit new milestones in the year 2025 and maybe later in 2025 for a smaller segment of retirees, or maybe even into 2026. And the reason for that thought process was pretty straightforward. This market decline in 2022 was not going to be fueled with lower interest rates and an aggressive government and Federal Reserve stimulus strategy. As a matter of fact, they're going to do kind of the opposite approach. You know, the 2022 drop might have been the result of too much stimulus in the first place. And so the Federal Reserve, rather than trying to spur the economy and growth, was going to do things that would reduce economic growth. You know, almost bring us to the brink of a recession, but not quite. You know, nobody wanted to be at a recession, but bring us kind of to the edge of it. And in fighting inflation, they had to take those steps. And so it was kind of logical that this recovery is going to take a little while. The reason that a pre-retiree can hit new milestones faster is also pretty straightforward. When you're saving money and you buy into a stock market that is declining in value, and if you continue to buy into that, then you buy shares of the market at cheaper prices. And so by the time the market hits its bottom, then you own more shares of the market at more favorable prices than before the market started to drop. And then as the market continues to accelerate and improve, you continue to buy even more shares at some cheaper prices. But by the time the market gets back to where it was before the drop, you now own a significant quantity more of the market than you did beforehand. And so since you have more shares at the same price as it was before, you're now richer than you probably ever have been. That's the basic math on why a pre-retiree can go through a market cycle and by the time the market recovers, come back much stronger. Now, a retiree isn't doing that. They're not buying into the market. So what a retiree tries to do is, since they're retired, they're pulling from their investments, but they try to pull money from an investment that's not volatile like the stock market. So they can ride through a stock market cycle and not have to sell shares of the market, but they are withdrawing. They're probably withdrawing from cash, money markets, and bonds. So by the time the market comes back to the previous level, they still might not be worth as much as they were before, simply because they sold and spent some of their money. And so they have to let the market come back to a higher value that exceeds the amount of money that they withdrew. And then the reason I expected that maybe some retirees wouldn't even hit a new milestone until late 2025 or maybe even 2026, all depended on their rate of withdrawal. You know, some retirees that spent a lot more money, you know, just mathematically, it's going to take a lot longer for them to recover. Now, as we get into 2026, I can see that has unfolded. You know, we've got, when we look at our pre-retired clients, you know, most of them hit new milestones a while back. A lot of retirees are worth more than they ever were. And we've got, you know, there's a smaller percentage of retirees that still haven't hit their previous milestone before. But they're headed toward that new milestone maybe in 2026. And, you know, a smaller segment of retirees haven't gotten back to their previous milestones before because they withdrew more money. But you also have to remember that's the point of retirement. You know, you're supposed to withdraw money. You're supposed to have a good time. So A lot of them are in good shape. It's just going to take a little longer to get back to where they were before. So we had some market gains in 23 and 24, but 2025 was, in my opinion, a much healthier market. We finally had what I call the broad market recovery. See, in 23 and 24, we had some market recovery, but it was really on the backs of just some of the biggest companies in our country. They were called the Magnificent Seven: Apple, Google, Microsoft, Tesla, Facebook, NVIDIA, and Amazon. So finally, it's nice that they had such a strong recovery, but it's not good to have a market that's so lopsided. So finally in 2025, well, actually toward the end of 2024, we started to get more of a broad recovery, and that was exciting. And then President Trump took office. It's, all the news was tariffs and what that might do. He had his Independence Day announcement in early April, and the markets took another big dive. And then shortly after that, it was around April 9th, something quite notable happened, and the broad market started to really expand. And for the first time in a while, a lot of stocks besides the Magnificent Seven did extremely well, and many of them did much better than the Magnificent Seven did. So that's a much healthier market when you've got the majority of these stocks doing well rather than just a very select few. In late March, we did a big rebalance on the portfolio to reduce exposure to the Mag 7 and increase exposure to the segments of the market that had been left behind. And the result of that is a much more stable, balanced, and more uniform recovery. The years since COVID have revealed some stark revelations that are hard to ignore. First of all, our government debt and deficit. At the end of 2025, U.S. debt reached about $38.5 trillion. Our deficit is a little over $2 trillion a year and has been for a while. I don't believe that these are sustainable numbers. I mean, very simple math would be, we'd be over $40 trillion in debt, and just in a handful more years, we could add another $6 trillion to that figure. The interest on our debt is exceeded $1 trillion now, and which is, double what it was just before COVID. Interest on our debt has become our biggest obligation, and it's, I don't know. It's a shame that we have to spend that much money in interest, and I wonder, how much more productive things we could do for the country and for people if we didn't just have to shell out all that money in interest. So we've got a huge income and tax disparity in our country. The top 10% of taxpayers earn roughly 50% of national income, and they pay roughly 70% of the tax bill. That's an extreme income and tax disparity that is much different from historical norms. This reflects a deeper erosion of the middle class, and framing the problem as the rich not paying their fair share, I think detracts from the structural problems that need to be addressed. Since 1980, manufacturing as a percentage of our economy has dropped from about 30% of GDP to about around 10% today. Along with jobs, we lost skills, infrastructure, and the ability to compete globally. COVID, wars, and unrest around the world has brought about the stark reality that we have become quite dependent on other nations, and sometimes quite adversarial nations, and that's an unhealthy situation for us to be in. For years, we've heard the message that the rich don't pay their fair share and we need income redistribution, but I think that distracts from what the real problem is. We need to reshore our manufacturing for that income disparity to be resolved. Regarding national security, to better understand national security, I reviewed both Trump's 2025 national security strategy and I read through Biden's 2022 national security strategy. Despite differing methods, the underlying core issues and objectives are amazingly similar. Both administrations believe that manufacturing must be reshored. China must be constrained. Taiwan must not fall by force. Middle East exposure should decline. Allies must contribute more. And the Western Hemisphere must be protected from adversarial influence. A key point in both administrations was that domestic strength underwrites national security. This represents a shift from post-Cold War assumptions that financial dominance, globalization, and military superiority would be sufficient. That assumption proved flawed, and it allowed us to weaken in other areas like our industrial strength, loss of the middle class, our cohesion, and our ability to produce some of our essential items of existence and stability. So while both administrations identified where our core problems are and what our objectives were, the strategies to obtain those varied dramatically. The Biden administration focused on altering systems so behaviors would follow. The Trump administration focused on immediately altering behaviors so systems would adjust or become irrelevant. For example, one of Biden's approach was to improve the human rights in China, where over a long period of time, he calls it a decisive decade, so over a period of many years, the living standards in China would improve, the cost of manufacturing would become higher, and therefore manufacturing might more normally shift away from China. Trump's approach is much more direct than that, where he would place a big tariff and immediately force countries like China or other places to respond and react to that. While the end goal is mainline, Trump's strategy forces action and can't be ignored. People inherently resist change and sometimes don't grasp the gravity of its necessity, and thus may see this approach as very unsettling. We've expanded our educational outreach. Since I got into this business, financial education has always been extremely important to me. We have a brand new library of educational videos on our website. Besides the book, we've got the blog. And then we started a Wealth as a Choice podcast, which we launched basically toward the end of 2025, and we're going full force in 2026. So I'm very excited about that. And when we, on the podcast, when we talk about wealth, we define wealth as abundance, not just financial, but across a broad range of spectrums, like health, knowledge, family, relationships, athletics, physical health. Through conversations with people doing meaningful things, we found where they have had success in all forms of abundance. We hope that through a wide range of conversations with these people, others can find meaningful connections that help them find abundance and wealth in their life. Artificial intelligence in practice. AI is definitely here to stay. And there's a lot of discussion about what it will replace, what jobs it might replace. So far, from a professional standpoint, my perspective is that AI makes smart people smarter. In other words, it's a phenomenal tool that we can use to do much more than we did before. Used without understanding, it can be very counterproductive. Used responsibly with proper cybersecurity and protections, it can be a huge opportunity driver. We have integrated AI into our practice with a strong emphasis on protecting client information. As AI becomes more embedded in daily life, both professionals and individuals need to be very cognizant about how the information is used, learned, and stored. A big theme as we look into 2026 is how we can gain control. We're living through stratospheric change and noises everywhere, and whether that is exciting or scary largely depends on our perspective. Certain realities are unlikely to change regardless of political leadership. Borders will be protected, manufacturing will be reshored through one method or another, deficits and debt will force difficult decisions, AI will continue to reshape productivity, the cost of healthcare, not just measured by the insurance premium, will need to be addressed. The livelihood of all Americans depends on a thriving government and business sector. It is in our best interest to have successful governance and business, no matter if we like who's in office or not. Our lives are more intertwined than they've ever been before. For example, in a 401k, if you invest into a target retirement date fund, you own a slice of Tesla. To wish that Tesla or any company were to fail is to wish that your own market value in your retirement 401k would decline. Our outcomes are far more intertwined than most people would realize. Individually, control comes from focusing on what you can influence. Save into Roth accounts where possible, learn productive financial behaviors, stay informed without emotional overload, focus time and energy on what you can control, and strive for success and recognize when the success of others also advances your own situation. The pendulum will always swing. We're a nation of checks and balances. Understanding the issues rather than reacting emotionally to the methods allows us to participate constructively to a more productive future. The world is changing quickly, and that can be unsettling. But change does not mean instability and a loss of control. When we take time to understand what is happening, economically, politically, and structurally, fear gives way to perspective. Progress is rarely smooth, but it is often productive. By focusing on what you can control and staying engaged without becoming consumed by the noise, you put yourself in a position to adapt, participate, and move forward with confidence. The years ahead may challenge us, but they also offer opportunity for those that approach them with clarity rather than emotion. I find greater confidence and productivity when I understand the issues and look for opportunity rather than fear. Thank you. We're excited about what 2026 has to offer, and we're always here for you if you have any questions.